Hello again. Thinking about the slow sunrising video, I met a family the other day where one of the ladies said, there was a video where someone was walking around telling you the name of every single weed on site. There are no weeds at sunrising. It's all wonderful wildflowers. So as Bruce said in the beginning, although the nature reserve is not formally a part of the agenda, we felt that perhaps it should be, and particularly this year when we don't have a nature talk to follow the AGM presentation. Trustees and friends are increasingly involved in this part of the Sunrising project as well. And as the nature reserve grows in importance and value, it is not just those connected with the burial ground, but also naturalists and conservationists who are getting involved and subscribing to the Friends. In terms of developments then, let's begin with what we call Michael's Meadow. Michael's Meadow is an 1.5 acres of what used to be grassland in the southwest of the site. You can see it encircled here. There you can see it. In fact, that picture was taken in late July 2017. The hay had been taken off in late June, and the grass was just starting to come through and greening up, thickening up again. In October that year, 2017, this whole area, the 1.5 acres here, was ploughed and sown with a mixture of wildflowers and grasses. It's taken a few challenges. It was badly affected by snow in March 2018, they call the beast from the east. Then drought came through the summer of 2018 and scorched a lot of the land. We did little but manage the creeping thistle that year. We were keen to watch how it progressed by itself, keeping a sort of a light hand. Summer 2018 wasn't bad, and it started to get a bit thicker with growth and with biodiversity. And in October last year, we resowed a few of the worst bare patches. But then we had last winter, which was incredibly wet, giving it further challenges, washing seed down. And some areas were really not underwater, but saturated for months. By June this year, it was nonetheless a sea of oxeye daisies, as you can see. Once the daisies went to seed, you could see other species were coming through. Here you can see the lovely rich dark purple of tufted or cowvetch, and you can see a little bit of knapweed, but mostly it's this yarrow from rich dusky pink to the white and the yarrow, and increasingly grasses, which are an important part of a developing meadow. You can see a beautiful strand of yellow agrimony here as well. There's also wild basil, field scabious, cornflowers, trefoils and more. It's getting there, but it will take another few years to find its own balance. And in that process, there will be more grasses. It won't be just that thick wildflower oxeye daisies as it was this year, which is an extraordinary sight, but sadly not a balanced wildflower meadow, not sustainable. This is what we're looking for, lots of different flowers. A part of our work is to monitor the changes brought about by transforming the grassland into the various different habitats that we're creating, in this instance the wildflower meadow, and to document those changes so that others can make use of the information, the data that we have. One immediate benefit of Michael's Meadow can be seen purely in terms of butterfly numbers. Butterflies are counted at sunrising and elsewhere by using what we call butterfly transects. These are particular stretches that are walked at a steady pace, counting the number of species as you pass. David does this work at sunrising. Just looking at these two species, the meadow brown underneath, and on the meadow scabious, the field scabious, and the small tortoiseshell on the oxeye daisy above. The numbers here counted are the highest count on a single transect walk. In other words, it's not how many butterflies were counted in a week or a month or the season. It's in one single walk. That's the number of that species of butterfly that was counted. And just these other two species are here, although many other species were, of course, counted. In 2017, the number is effectively 0 on the grassland. In 2018, our first year that was very much scorched out by the drought, it went from that up to 11. You can see last year, we're getting there, 2019, but this year, 2020, we see effectively a logarithmic change, and that's what we're looking for, a huge change in terms of numbers. These butterflies are indicators of the improvement of the environment. And here's Michael's meadow yesterday. So from that sea of oxeye daisies, you can see most of these seed heads are oxeye daisies. And this is the first area that has been cut. Mown, in fact, in the middle of mowing, and there you can see James. This is his excellent little tractor that's very maneuverable, but on the back is a flail collector, which means he can cut and gather up the hay all at the same time. So we are removing the hay that comes off so that it doesn't rot and increase the fertility. We want the fertility to go down. Now, some of the seed will fall and help with the reseeding, but some of the seed will be taken away. And what we're doing with that hay this year is the torch. So we're back to our map, but instead of seeing the map as it is at the moment, this is a part of our vision map, what we hope we will be getting to. And you can see the next stretch of wildflower meadow that we're creating, which is at the moment called the torch because of its shape. While we ploughed Michael's meadow, we aren't going to plough the torch. Instead, we're using what's called green hay, by taking hay off the established meadow and spreading it over the area. Now this year we have not done that fastidiously. We should be harrowing the soil first and upping the amount of yellow rattle with extra seed, that magic little plant that helps in all wildflower meadows as it weakens the thick grasses. This year it's just a starting point where we are looking at the process, what is needed, and going through it, seeing what happens, just the practical steps. Next year we'll be doing it in earnest. Now the next photo is taken up here. So up there you can see, looking down over the meadow, over the torch, towards Ilmington Hill there. You can see this beautiful red fescue. But the important thing here is you can see the tussocky grassland that wasn't cut last year on both sides here, and then the torch in the middle. So you can see just how not cutting some of the areas of grassland last year compared with the area that's cut makes for two effectively different habitats. Last year we did shake some yellow rattle seed over small sections in an experiment, and some of it has come through, but mostly we've just been managing the creeping thistle, an ongoing journey. This year, let's see what the green hay does. So this is the torch before the grass was cut. This is the torch on the 7th of August when the grass was cut, and all of that grass was then rowed and baled and taken off, because that's the grass from that area, and then the green hay was spread. Now this is the green hay taken off Michael's meadow and Betty's meadow and Marjorie's meadow around the site, and these are heaps of hay which are then going to be spread all over the torch and other areas of grassland that have been cut this year. There you can see the torch, and at the bottom of the torch is what we call the butterfly stones, and that's where we're going next. So I've taken away the torch and you can just see the map with the butterfly stones there. And there you can see from the butterfly stones looking up towards the roundhouse. This is what I call my massive rockery. This is local Haunton stone on which butterflies will be able to bask in sunshine, but also with crevices, nooks and crannies between the rocks for them to shelter. It was created in October last year and then planted up with 100 or so little plants. But most of them died in the heat and drought of the spring and early summer this year. I do have another 20 or 30 this year, which I'll put in: creeping cinquefoil, wild strawberry, bird's-foot trefoil, together with some sedums which are still there from the old roundhouse roof. And although most of them died, some are coming through. With the rain that started in July, some have survived. Not many, but some. And I'll be, as I say, planting up again in October. And next spring, if it's dry, I'm going to water them in and keep watering. In time, this will become what I hope will be a large rockery covered in creeping little plants, filled with the humming of bees and butterflies. Let's go to orchids now. Here you can see a lovely picture of an Essex skipper on a pyramidal orchid. That's a photo of David's. Orchids are one of the plants on site that we map carefully. They are another indicator of a habitat that is becoming stronger in terms of ecological wealth and biodiversity. Orchids, because they have very particular needs, tend to just magically appear and disappear. Their seed is incredibly small. They have their own mycorrhizal networks. They're a mystery to most people. Let's just show you a quick snapshot of a few changes. These are mapped in 2019. Bee orchids in pink, common spotted orchids in yellow, pyramidal orchids in blue. You can see last year we had lots of bee orchids and some of the other two species. But this year, very different. While we saw plenty of common spotted orchid leaves in April, they all disappeared before flowering. The same with bee orchids. We saw hardly any bee orchids in flower. We think it was either the heavy May frosts, we had hoar frosts for 2 or 3 days in May, and or the heat and drought of that same month. But the pyramidal orchids did well. Note we're only showing you a map here of this southeast side of sunrising. These are woodland burial areas. This is Liliana's wood and Seth's wood. That's because there are no orchids in the grass. There are no orchids in the grass field when we arrived, and there are none at sunrising in areas that we haven't been developing. They only turn up when the soil has been moved, where we've planted trees, where there are graves, and where we've been sowing wildflowers, even though there's no orchid seed in the wildflower mix. The orchids just come by themselves. It's another big plus for the Developing Nature Reserve and an indicator of progress. Orchid monitoring, you may see at different points little pea sticks with, or you may have seen them with little plastic tapes of different colours. It's a bit tatty and we're looking at improving this system, but it allows us to put a marker where an orchid was last year so that the following spring we can see if it comes up in exactly the same place. If you do see the little markers, please don't move them. You may like to watch this little story of a pyramidal orchid. You can see it coming into bud and into flower. And this is a measure of the patience it takes to monitor orchids. Sitting in exactly the same spot to take a picture from exactly the same angle as it changes over the course of 2 months. Beautiful. Bats. This year a fellow from Warwickshire Bat Group came and gave us some excellent advice with regard to bats at sunrising. We know we've got pipistrelles and probably a few other species, but it is early days in terms of bat habitat at sunrising. But the bat fellow, the Batman, encouraged us to put up some better bat boxes, and identified clear locations that would be best for the boxes. And as a licensed bat handler, he will return to check the boxes periodically. All the boxes are sponsored by families. Tree sparrows. although we've been monitoring tree sparrows for some years, aware that they have been on site, and the gossip about tree sparrows had got about amongst local birders. We knew that because folk were just arriving on spec with binoculars and wandering around looking at them. We had a fairly good colony of this endangered little bird. But this year, Philip Walker told Mike Pollard of the Banbury Ornithological Society, and a new project was begun. With the help of the Ornithological Society, 12 very beautiful little nest boxes were installed with 2 new feeders. We made a call for sponsorship to you, the friends, and the rest of the Sunrising community to ask you to help us fill those feeders. The response was brilliant. Thank you so much. There is an increasing threat from the growing population of house sparrows locally, not just at Sunrising, but in the broader local area. House sparrows, their populations rise and fall, and they're currently on the rise. Being larger and feistier, they tend to take over where tree sparrows might be. Tree sparrows still need more help. We have got an information sheet on our webpage, so if you go to the Nature Reserve on our website, you'll see more information about this project. Excuse me. Our barn owl boxes, our barn owl box had stock doves nesting in it again this year. The local barn owl team who came to check it, who come about 3 times a year, tell us that this year has been another poor year for barn owls. Why? In some ways, well, we never know the full story. But this year, the mouse, the field vole population, crashed in fields and meadows around. The winter was so terribly wet that all little burrowing animals struggled, just drowning in the saturated soil. We have found vole nests fairly high inside tree guards for the first time, as little creatures strive to get out of the saturated, the drenched soil to find places, dry places to nest in the spring. Without food, without the voles and mice, the barn owls starve, of course. Springs that are too windy and too wet, or both, and they have been recently, mean owls have a hard time. But there is some evidence for them beginning to adjust to this climate change, breeding later in the year. We hope they find a way through these difficult years. That's a beautiful picture by local photographer Mark Hunter. In terms of positivity, we've put up a few more nest boxes this year, notably the first nest box to go up in Liliana's Wood, which is one of our oldest woodland burial areas. In other words, this is one of the first boxes that have gone up in a memorial tree. This is a memorial tree here, a wild service tree, in an area on graves. It was wonderful to see birds starting to use these new copses of woodland a few years ago as the trees grew big enough, and now we're able to put nest boxes in them. So it's brilliant to see the trees, the woodland growing, and we hope little birds will nest in there too. Moths. Some people don't like moths, but moths are perhaps the most closely and expertly monitored creatures at Sunrising. As really important indicators of climate change and the health of an ecosystem, this monitoring is brilliant for the ongoing records of the developing nature reserve, but also for the local environment. As habitats are being degraded elsewhere by development, species seriously declining, Sunrising has increasing numbers of moths and increasing numbers of species of moths. We have Alan Pryor and his colleagues to thank for their regular surveying of this information. And although some of you think moths are dull, fluttery little things, here are a few of our amazing residents. This is a feathered gothic. This is a ruby tiger. That's a herald. And this little creature here is called a leopard. Peach blossom, a barred straw moth, a yellowtail, so fluffy. That's a blue bordered carpet. And down here, looking straight into the camera, is a feathered thorn. Just amazing. So although we don't have statistics clearly accessible for this year as yet, for 2020, From 2014 to 2019, 27 moth night surveys were held at Sunrising. That's 529 different species have now been counted, and that makes amazingly over 17,000 individual moths. Our wildlife pond has been of particular interest this year. Because of all the rain last autumn, we were unable to stop the inflow of water into the pond from the field drains, ditches, and off the land itself, and the pond level was just too high by the time we wanted to clear the seasonal growth in October, as we normally do every year. As a result, this year the amount of open water in the pond is significantly reduced. If we fail to clear it this autumn, we may well just lose the pond next year. It will just go under the throng of reeds and rushes. The major loss is very few dragonflies compared with previous years. That's because dragonflies are drawn to the reflecting light of open water for courting and mating. The winners, well, the moorhens enjoyed the fact that there was more cover, and they had chicks, which was lovely. There are lots of damselflies, and in fact butterflies. The profusion of water mint around the edges of the pond meant plenty of butterflies. Here you can see meadow brown, the small tortoiseshell, two gatekeepers, and the peacock, and other butterflies, of course, all on water mint. Droning. This was a project we undertook last March, just before or just as lockdown was creeping in, using very high-tech equipment. This fellow, in his reflecting jacket, placed squares around the site, these yellow rimmed squares, which he left there for a certain amount of time until they connected to satellites and showed him exactly to within inches where they were on the face of the planet. He then flew his drone to create a photograph of the site, a number of different photographs, which could be connected then to those exactly pinpointed locations. And the photographs were of an extraordinary accuracy. This wasn't done for fun or for the nice pictures, but to allow us to map the site more accurately, perfectly. So high-tech, the image generated has extraordinary detail. Here you can see the torch. You can also see areas of grassland that we cut last year. You can see the paths that were mown. And you can see burial areas. You can just about see the trees planted on graves, but you can also see the ridge and furrow, that residual ridge and furrow, which wonderfully, for the first time, we are seeing that the ridge and furrow has survived right the way through burial areas where we thought it was lost. So high-tech actually meets low-tech. Here are white paper plates on pea sticks, which we used to mark out specific points. Actually, they are our grid points for our burial areas. So these showed up on the drone map, and they are now very, very specifically located. And if we go back to that map, I can show you just how we're using it. These are, if I can click the right place, burial areas. So you can see the map, and then you can see burial areas mapped onto that. You can see burial areas that are actually used, some which are full, like down here, but also burial areas which aren't yet in use. And of course, those will grow. But now we've got a starting point. It helps us to grid our burial areas with real accuracy. It also helps us manage space for forecasting. Back to the map. It also helps us with planning. So you can see the original map again, and there you can see what we call our Qgis map, the map that we use every day to adjust things, and looking where we're planning for the future. So back to that map and the planning map on top. Very cool and very useful.